Welcome to the Experience Darden podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'd like to share my recent conversation with Andrew Schoka. Andrew is a second-year student in our full-time MBA class of 2026, and he and I recently connected to talk more about his background, his decision to pursue an MBA, what led him to Darden, how his career goals have evolved during his time here at the Darden School, and so much more. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to the Experience Darden podcast so you never miss an update. Remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's my conversation with Andrew Schoka. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Brett. Happy to be here.
How are you doing? How's everything?
Good. The quarter's really flying by. I can't believe it's already almost October. I remember thinking that, surely second year at Darden would be a little less active, a little less full, because first year was just such a whirlwind. But man, it has really just flown by so far.
What classes are you taking this quarter?
So I've kind of gone and stacked my schedule with a lot of startup focused things now that I ended up, getting into sort of that space at Darden, it's a whole other story. It was not really what I expected to be doing at Darden. So I've got a class called Starting New Ventures with Sarah Sarasvathy. I've got Venture Velocity, which is a class where students get to work on their ventures sort of outside the classroom as a thing for credit and get some coaching and mentorship from some of the Darden faculty. I've got a couple other sort of online or asynchronous courses, and then my one like really fun one that I wanted to take that I was excited about is a class called Financial Crises and Civic Reaction, which is kind of a mix between an econ class and a little bit of a history class. It's been a really, really interesting one so far.
Yeah, what a great lineup of courses. I have a little bit of envy. I love listening to people describe their schedules. It's a great thing to be in school. So thank you for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit more about you. Who are you and what's your background? What did you do before coming to Darden?
Sure. So I spent my career in federal government. I was active duty military before coming to Darden for about 7 or 8 years. I out of undergrad, I commissioned through ROTC, and I was a cyber officer with the Army for my career. So I stationed a couple different places here on the East Coast, but worked in offensive cyber operations for places like the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command and a couple other sort of U.S. government, DoD and intelligence community offices. So I worked mostly on the federal government side, getting to do cybersecurity and a couple other kind of technical roles. When I was, working like maybe 2020, 21, coming out of the pandemic, working things like election security or critical infrastructure and Russia, Ukraine, some really interesting places to be doing cyber and intelligence, and a little different than I expected my career in the Army to go, but really enjoyed getting to leverage my background as an engineer and getting to work in pretty technical roles for a long time, and really enjoyed it. Kind of had this really, I think, a field that I really enjoyed. I really found that cybersecurity made a lot of sense to me. It was a increasingly important thing in the world, and continues to be relevant today across technology and even just kind of broader industry. And so I really enjoyed that. And when I was sort of looking ahead at what I wanted to do next after the military, I knew I wanted to, in some ways, kind of use my experience, use what I had done in cybersecurity, but I wanted to think beyond just kind of being an engineer or being a technician in these very technical roles that I'd been in before. But that's kind of where I'd spent most of my career, and really, really enjoyed getting to kind of bounce around a couple of unique places on the federal government side to see some exciting things.
Yeah, you mentioned this desire to be thought about as more than a technician. Is that what led you to think about an MBA?
Yeah, when I was thinking about my transition out of the military, I knew I wasn't planning on making the Army a career. I loved my time in the military, and I was very, very proud of the time that I spent in service. But I wanted to move beyond, being, technical and being solely focused on one aspect of the field. And I knew later on down the road I wanted to start or run my own business. I wanted to be able to lead a small team doing something impactful in the field, whether that's cybersecurity or defense tech. I knew there were so many opportunities across the industry that I wanted to I don't know, I wanted to be able to help lead some of that and build a great company. But I never worked in the private sector, and when my kind of time in the military was coming to a close, and I was looking at, hey, here's the types of roles, or the types of jobs that I thought I would, want to take, or where I'd want to build my career. Something I felt like something was missing, and I had all this great technical experience and had seen some really neat things and worked with some really incredible people, but I really lacked a way to translate that into sort of the business world, and how to bring that experience, that skill set, into something that was commercially focused, into places that deal with building products, or on the cybersecurity side that deal with sort of providing these services and platforms to businesses. And so that's when I kind of first started thinking about an MBA as a way to round out my military experience and technical expertise, and find a way to kind of translate that, and really, I think, kind of put a capstone on some really good practical business leadership training to set me up for what I wanted to do in my career.
How did you get interested in Darden? How did Darden get on your radar?
That's another really good question, because my Darden story started really early on. Both my parents went to UVA. So I grew up coming to Charlottesville to football games. I think to this day I've still been to more UVA football games than where I went for undergrad, which is the other Virginia State School. But I've always had a really strong personal connection with Charlottesville. I've got family that lives in the area. So when I was looking at schools, I knew that Darden was going to be on my list. As much for the personal connection there, as what I started to learn about what made Darden unique. Um, and then when I learned about the case method, and when I came to Darden to visit, and finally got to sit in the class and actually see what this case method thing was that I've been hearing so much about, I think that's when, like, the first domino started to fall for me. When I sat in this class and I watched students teaching each other, interacting with each other, and I got to see kind of one of those light bulb moments that Darden faculty love to try to encourage in the classroom. And that's when I think, yeah, that first domino fell for me, when I realized, oh, this is how I want to learn this. I really couldn't imagine learning, business in such a practical, experiential way, like, any differently now. And then, as I met some of my future classmates at some of the Darden Days events and the pre-admissions events, it really just started to solidify for me that these were people I felt a really strong professional and personal connection with. These were people who wanted to make an impact in industry, who had really diverse experiences and diverse ambitions across both public and private sector. I really was impressed with the people I was meeting. And honestly, like, the thing I always tell when, like, visiting students, or when I talk to folks about Darden, is it ended up being the easiest decision in the world for me, because you get that gut feeling, and I think you kind of have to trust that to an extent. And I totally had this very strong gut feeling about Darden, even outside of everything I felt that was attractive about the case method, about Darden's awesome support for veterans and the military community. But I just had this great gut feeling when I was here and I was sitting in the classroom or walking on grounds, that was totally validated when I came and started here at Darden last fall.
Do you remember the class you sat in on?
Yeah, it was a it was leadership communications, which I'm told is not a usual one to sit in on, because it's actually a smaller class environment. It was like, instead of the your full section, it's cut in half. And I just remember laughing out loud when the professor got up and explained what the assignment was that the students were going to do that class, which was like hosting a talk show. This was a case about the Boston Olympics, and they had students like role play all of these different characters in the case. And I thought it was just kind of like, oh, hey, like you can go back to your group and you talk this through. But no, like at the end of class, they ran a full like talk show up at the front of class, and students got so like passionately into their side of this issue, like arguing with each other, really kind of like testing these ideas. I'd never seen something like that in a classroom before. I was totally hooked.
Yeah, a little different from a lecture environment.
Yes, very.
So you come to Darden. Obviously, you're excited about the academic experience, and I really love your point about that sort of gut feel that you have. We talk to a lot of prospective students about their MBA decision, and people can get really hung up reading things online and rankings and all of this that kind of take you away from just that feeling that you might have as you engage with people from school, or perhaps you spend
Hmm.
time on the campus. That matters as you're
Hmm.
making this decision. That when you find a place and you just feel comfortable there, you feel like it's going to be a good place for you. It's worth listening to that.
Totally agree. Like the amount of times I typed in on Reddit, like UVA and whoever else, like just to try to understand what made UVA and Darden different. And got so caught up in, all right, well, it's here on this list or it's there on this list. And then I honestly, then I started meeting people who were going to be my classmates, and I started meeting faculty, and I started meeting members of the community. And yes, I think, the metrics and the tangibles about a program matter, but the intangibles are just so important when it's a place that you're going to spend 2 years of your life. And particularly for me, like coming out of the military, this was my first kind of foray into the business world, into working in a commercial environment. And so I was really invested in finding the right cultural fit and the right personal fit. And I know for sure that I found that at Darden.
You come to Darden, you're a brand new first year student. What was that adjustment like to being back in school, to being in a graduate business environment?
It's very fast paced, and it's a little tough at first. You never really, I think, appreciate just how full your schedule is or is going to be at Darden until you're a couple weeks into the first quarter, and you've got classroom requirements, you've got learning team, you've got recruiting events, then you've got all of the social events like Darden Cup or things that your section is doing. Your calendar fills up really quickly. And I think like the biggest lesson I learned in that transition was how difficult it can be to really prioritize the things you want to invest time in, because that is by far your most limited resource at Darden is time. Time to invest in meeting with career coaches through the Career Center, time to invest in spending time with your section outside of classes, time to invest in one of the dozen clubs that you're going to end up joining at Darden and never planned to, but all of a sudden now you're in the outdoor club and the racket sports club and the golf club, and they've all got something exciting going on that week. So time management really became important. To me personally, I felt the academics, like Darden just sets up such a strong support system through the learning teams and through your section, that I felt the transition into Darden academics was so well supported and much easier to make because it was a little more structured. But the free form of, hey, you have to prioritize your schedule because you can't make both the camping trip and the golf trip, or you can't make this 1 day career conference that Darden's putting on in DC. And so you really have to be very focused and deliberate about managing that time, because there's just never enough of it. So that was I think really something that I learned very quickly, is that you had to be very organized and had to really be comfortable making tough decisions about prioritizing your time, because there's just never enough of it.
What were your rules in terms of thinking about how to navigate those priorities? Like, were there things that you knew were like your number one or number two priorities that helped you figure out how to spend your time?
Yeah, I'm still figuring it out in some respects. It's always a balance, but I think that the two things that were the kind of always my North Star were recruiting and academics. They're the two things that you come to Darden for. You choose Darden because you know it's an academically rigorous program. You know that the faculty are world class, and the educational experience is not going to be something that you can replace easily on the outside or any other type of experience. So that was something I knew I wanted to prioritize. I wanted to prioritize classes. I wanted to prioritize I like, for instance, I really needed to learn finance. That was something I had no background in, but I wanted to start my own business, and I needed to learn how to, how to build some of these models and how to speak that language. So I really wanted to prioritize learning in some of those classes, and actually, like, engaging with the material to a level where I felt like, okay, like, I may not be the expert in this, but I certainly know enough to be asking the right questions and know who I should talk to about it. And then the other side of the coin is recruiting. That to me was sort of the other reason that you come to Darden, is because of fantastic career outcomes and support for a broad range of industries that students might be recruiting for. And so I really, especially early on in first year, I really prioritized time towards working on a resume and getting feedback from my second year coach and from career coaches. I prioritized going to recruiting events. Darden organizes some tech treks. I went to one of those, and some of these career conferences that Darden puts on specific to certain industries or certain areas. So to me, those were the two things that I couldn't get anywhere else, and I would focus on making those commitments and then fitting in, the social events or other requirements kind of around those. And I found that gets easier to do the more the year goes on, because you get better at managing your time. But it's always kind of a little bit of a balancing act.
Couple questions for you. Thank you. That's very comprehensive answer, and it's always interesting to me to hear how students are choosing to spend their time and what's sort of guiding them as they make these difficult choices. You only have so much time, you only have so much energy, and it's important to have a North Star. It's important to have a clear sense of your priorities. Um,
Mhm.
Tell us a little bit more about the career track you participated in. Where'd you go?
Yeah, so I went through tech focused recruiting at Darden last year, when I was, my kind of priority early was going to be, I wanted to work in product management or work in some type of technical program management. So I focused really heavily on a lot of Darden's tech focused recruiting events, and one of those is the Darden Tech Treks. There's a couple of them every year that they make out to San Francisco, to Seattle, and then one here on the East Coast up to DC. So I went on the DC Tech Trek because it focused largely on public sector tech and a little bit of defense tech mixed in, which was an area that I had an interest in. And so we all hopped on a bus early one morning, and Darden took us up to Northern Virginia and DC. We went and visited some offices of some large tech companies up in DC. I think I went by the Google office there in Northern Virginia, which was really fun to connect with some of their team that does some public sector work. And then we went by the Sands Family Grounds, which is Darden's campus up in Northern Virginia. And Darden brought in some alumni speakers. They brought in some faculty speakers, ran a couple panels that sort of brought in perspectives from defense tech, from commercial tech, from tech-focused venture capital. It was just really a really, really full, busy day of tech-focused networking and sort of helping students literally get into the office of places that they would potentially be working. Especially kind of the timing of it in late September, early October is when you're starting to figure out places you're applying to. And within tech, you're starting to kind of go through those screener interviews. So it really gave me some good information to use in those conversations, and helped gave me some early perspective on the types of roles that MBA interns specifically would play in large tech companies.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. You obviously the case method was a big part of why you came to Darden. I'm also curious, what was it like not just to be an observer in the case method, but now to be a participant in the case method? Was that an adjustment for you too?
Yes, it was an adjustment. Not in any like negative connotation or anything like that. But it was definitely an adjustment coming out of primarily an engineering background, and I went to grad school for cybersecurity, which is a very different teaching style. It was definitely an adjustment. Coming into the Darden classroom, where the expectation is that you've read the case, you've talked through it with a couple of your peers, you've built the model, you've run the numbers, you've got a solution or at least an answer to what is the what's the decision here and what's your recommendation. But then from there, you know, class is about sort of picking that apart and then saying, okay, well, like, okay, why do we make this decision, or why are you recommending this? Does anyone else have a different perspective based on how you've run the numbers or based on the model you've built? It was definitely an adjustment to the idea where the students do most of the talking. And I think the Darden faculty, who are just, I continue to be so impressed at how skillful they are at this. The Darden faculty are really there as a very high expertise facilitator who has deep knowledge in the subject matter, or in some cases like wrote the case you're talking about, and has really deep expertise in that field, who then is going to ask the right questions and guide the discussion to let students kind of bring out those insights and start to put together like, okay, like maybe we thought this originally, but now that we're looking at the model slightly differently, or I've got this perspective, like maybe we'd look at it this way. And so like I really came to appreciate the way an answer or an idea would evolve over the course of a class, and realizing that, your participation in class is a really important part of your, not just your learning experience and your ability to learn the case, but also everyone else's in the classroom too. I learned so much from classmates who had backgrounds in fields like marketing or finance, because they were, willing and able to step up and say, hey, I worked something similar at my job when I did this, prior to Darden, and here's how we approached it. And so you start to get these bits of insight from classmates, the faculty asking the questions to kind of steer the discussion the right way. And it's a little different at first to see the classroom flipped around that way. But once you get going and you get in the rhythm of it and you learn how to prep these cases, it really becomes um, I think, such a supportive and interesting way to really learn the material, that you come out with, such a level of confidence having worked through these cases in that way and across really all these different subject areas.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And you're right. It is different from how students have typically learned before they get to Darden, but hopefully very energizing and engaging. And it's different. You obviously are somebody who your career goals were very much on your mind as you were thinking about coming to an MBA program. I'm curious about how they evolved. You talked about your tech interest, you got this entrepreneurial interest as well. How have your career goals evolved during your time here at Darden?
Yeah, it's a really good question. They've changed a lot. Like I mentioned, I came in wanting to recruit for tech focused roles. I wanted to leverage having an engineering degree and an engineering background, and I thought I would go and work somewhere in a large tech company and get that experience, and then with the goal or the eye towards taking a little bit more of an entrepreneurial leap later on in my career. Um, but I got sort of halfway through the year and was going through tech recruiting and started going to some of the entrepreneurship and startup focused programming put on by Batten, sort of one of the institutes at UVA that focuses on technology and entrepreneurship at Darden. And I just something just clicked for me. It was the first time I had engaged with entrepreneurship as a discipline, and the first time I'd been exposed to other founders and other people who wanted to build companies and were excited about the idea of being, the first or the second person to go and start a company somewhere and take on a tough problem that a large company hasn't been able to solve yet. And somewhat serendipitously, through a connection at the engineering school, I met my co-founder Hunter, is now my business partner on my startup. He and I were introduced about halfway through the year at Darden last year, and then we made the decision to launch our own venture in around January or February of this past year. And so I I spent the second half of the year at Darden and ended up working over the summer full time through the Batten iLab incubator, which is a program for students to work full time on their venture. So I ended up taking the entrepreneurial leap a little bit earlier than I had originally planned. Darden has been fantastic in sort of supporting that pivot from tech recruiting to entrepreneurship and given us a lot of resources to be successful and more importantly to learn how to run and build a business.
So much to unpack there. Tell us a little bit more about your venture, your idea.
Yeah, so we're building in the AI security space. As we looked at the runaway adoption of AI and how quickly AI has been commercialized, both in the public sector and regulated private industries like healthcare. We saw this opportunity that was going to be fleeting compared to the way cybersecurity has tried to fix the internet. And it's taken 50 years for cybersecurity to build some of these safety and security measures in. But with AI, we were so early on that Hunter and I felt that we still had an opportunity to get this right in the early stages. And we had the advantage of having some really novel, cutting edge research that Hunter had built as a part of his PhD when he came through UVA that positioned us well to compete, I think, in a very early market of AI security that in a way that's a little different than a lot of our competitors and other offerings. But I just, the way to think about a market and the way to think about building a product that somebody might actually want to use and going through that cycle of finding customers and discovering customers. I felt like I had the best setup to be able to do that in such a new and fast changing field because a lot of the resources we had here at Darden. So we're really excited to keep building the venture, especially coming out of the summer, coming out of the incubator through Darden. It's been a really exciting journey so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing to build over the next year.
How was the incubator experience helpful to you?
I don't know how we would have made the progress we've made now without having had the support from the Batten iLab incubator. I heard about it first in like December or January of last year of my first year, and that was kind of when all these things started coming into place of like, oh well, there's actually a great way to get that entrepreneurial experience and try building a venture a little earlier. And Darden has this great resource that provides some grant funding and provides tons and tons of startup support resources, like some pro bono legal support, speakers across early startup finance, marketing, branding, investors. It was phenomenal getting to hear all these different things. The best resource that came out of the incubator, though, was getting to work with 30 other UVA founders, both Darden and the rest of the University of Virginia as well, and building this like really exciting, energizing core group of other founders who were going through the same challenges and the same struggles. We're trying to build early products or take on these large industries in a way that was new, novel, and unique. And getting to work with that group was just so energizing and such a great support system for us, particularly in the very early stages, that I know we wouldn't be where we're at now without having gone through that program and getting to focus on the venture with the support of Darden and Batten.
Where are you specifically with your venture? Obviously, it's still early days, but can you tell us sort of directionally where you are?
Yeah, so we like I mentioned, like doing some of that customer discovery, which was a big part of the incubator for us. We've got our first commercial customers now. We're looking at kicking off a couple more commercial pilots this fall. We've also looked at some federal opportunities and through some of the kind of effectual approach that Batten and Darden really emphasizes of building partnerships and finding resources where you can. We've built some really good relationships with other firms in the defense tech space that enable us to go after some larger federal contracts as well. So we're hoping to see some of those start to come in later this fall. The product is, we've got an MVP, we've got something we can show customers and show partners, and excited to continue building that. We're also sort of going through the whole fundraising process, which was another major learning point coming out of the incubator, with learning the right way to pitch investors and learning how to find investors that are a good fit. And some of our early investors we actually met because they were speakers at the incubator, and so now we're partnered with them more officially on the venture, and been able to have their support as we build the business and start to actually do some hiring for the firm this fall.
Wow, that's a lot. A lot to be excited about there. Are there any other things that you're looking forward to in the months ahead? Obviously, second year is going by quickly, as you noted at the top of the conversation, but anything else that you're excited about?
It is definitely going by fast. I have my my DWC, my like Darden Worldwide campus experience coming up in actually just a couple of weeks, which is I'm really excited to spend a week in Finland and Estonia with about 30 other Darden students, led by some Darden faculty, looking at how technology changes policy and changes some of the ways that these societies have approached their really just kind of like foundational infrastructure and building businesses. And so really excited to spend a week over fall break between Finland and Estonia on that trip. That's been something I've been looking forward to for really since the spring. I know that's been a long time in the works. I'm excited for some Q2 classes it'll kick off later on in October, as we figure out sort of what the schedule looks like for the rest of our year for quarter 3 and quarter 4. It's hard to just narrow it down and pick just a couple of things to fit onto the schedule, but I'm excited to see what we've got lined up for the rest of the year.
Well, Andrew, one more question for you, and then we'll let you go. What's one piece of advice you would share with our listeners? Obviously, you've already shared a number of things for them to think about, but a final word for them as they think about their own MBA journeys.
I think Darden can be many things to many people. For me, I looked at Darden as a transition from military service. I looked at it as a way to learn about entrepreneurship. I looked at it as a way to build some of the foundational skills for starting and running my own business. But in all those things, I looked at it as it became so many other things to me too. It became a source of some of my closest friends, and some really exciting, fun trips and social events that I never would have thought I would have experienced, particularly during graduate business school. But Darden has just been such a incredible community to be a part of, and offers so many different things to so many different people depending on your goals and your journey. And I continue to be impressed at the way that Darden is able to meet students and meet members of that community where they're at in that journey. And really my advice would be to come in and take advantage of that. Really dive in and sign up for the clubs that you've heard about that sound interesting, that maybe you wouldn't have tried before, and go to the events that sound interesting, and the events that might help you broaden your perspective and your horizons beyond what you've thought so far. And Darden will continue to find ways to surprise you in bringing so much value and connection to that experience.
Andrew, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for your time today. It was great talking with you, and good luck with your startup.
Thanks, Brett. I appreciate it.
And that was my conversation with Andrew Schoka, a second-year student in our full-time MBA class of 2026. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Till next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.